Okay, so let's make a new class. Say string methods to implement the work that we're supposed to do here. And our first method is supposed to return a string concatenated with itself. So we're not told what to name it. Its return type is going to be string. And I guess I'll call it dupe. And what we want to do is return the string concatenated with itself. So we just have to return n plus n. And we should test this out a little bit before proceeding. So let's try calling dupe with hello. Let's try running this. Okay, so we see it returned hello concatenated with hello just like it should have. So our next method is supposed to take in two things. I'll put it up here. Takes in a string and an integer. And let's describe above this what it's supposed to do. I'll do that using JavaDoc. So this is supposed to return n copies of s. So s is the input string, n is the number of copies, and we return n copies of s. So in support of this, let's make an answer that initially is nothing, and then we'll iterate n times, and we will concatenate to ants what we get as the input string s. And then we'll return the answer when we're done. Now to test this out, probably what we ought to do is write a loop ourselves. I'll just have this loop go 5 times. And let's print out what we get by calling copies on some other string and specifying I as the number of times. So we got hello, hello. Now there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines of output. And what we can't see here is that the empty string has been produced, but that's actually the result we want. If we ask for 0 copies of a string s, that should be the empty string. Here's 1 copy, 2 copies, 3 copies, and 4. So our copies method does appear to be working correctly. The next thing we're told to do is to go back and rewrite our first method. So this method returns a string concatenated with itself. N is the input string. We're going to return the concatenation of n and n. And what we're asked to do is to revise this. So instead of doing returning n plus n, we want to use reduction to copies. So instead of saying n plus n, and this is mostly a pedagogical exercise, we're going to return what we get by calling copies, and we want 2 copies of n so that it is n concatenated with itself. Now having made this change, if I run the code, we should see exactly the same output. And we do, there's the hello, hello, which comes from our dupe of hello, and then the iterated testing of copies. We need to look at the split operator on a string, and one way to do that is to search in Google for the Java String API, and the top hit will give us what we want. And what we see here is the JavaDoc for the string class. And what we're going to do is we're going to scroll down to split. There's quite a few methods here. And this split allows us to specify a string, which can be a very complicated kind of string, but we're going to use it very simply. And it takes the input string, that is the string upon which split is called, and generates an array with one element for the array for each phrase that's separated by the specified splitter character here, or pattern. So maybe it's easiest to see this with an example. Let's try an example of this. So back to our main program, let's try an example. So let's take an input string S. It says I like computer science. And let's get an array of the words of that by calling s.split. And we want to give it the space as a splitter. What we can do then is iterate over this array and print out each word in turn. And let's run this. In our output window, we see I like computer science has been split apart. Each element of the array W corresponds to each of these words. So the 0th entry is I, entry index 1 is like, and then computer and science appear after that in the array. Now what we're asked to do is to write an inverse function called join. And it takes in an array, let's say, just give it a simple name array, and a string joiner, which is to be interposed between each element of the array and eventually returned. So I'm going to start this out by having string answer initially be array of 0. And what I'll do is then iterate over my array, but I'm going to start at element 1, because I already captured element 0. And with each of these, I'm going to add to answer the joiner character, string, whatever that is, plus the ith element of the array, which is currently in the loop. When I'm done, I'm going to return that as my result. So we capture the first word or the first element of the array, and between that and every subsequent element of the array, we interpose the joiner string. What I should be able to do is to put this back together again. By calling join with my words and the space again. So let's see if this puts it back together again. So it didn't, and the reason it didn't is that I forgot to add joiner plus array of I to what answer already has, so answer only captured the last of those, being the word science. So let's fix that. We want to interpose joiner between the answer we developed so far and the current word, the current element of the array inside the loop there. Okay, back together, I like computer science. Now if I wanted to, I could put something else between them, maybe 3 exclamation points. And I get I, shout, 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 like, shout, shout, and so on, computer science. This exclamation point at the end was from the original string. Let's try something different. How about something like that? I like computer science. So we have this method join now, which is somewhat the inverse of split, and we'll take an array of strings and put them back together with some other string interposed between each of the adjacent words. And finally, what we're asked to do is to rewrite copies, the second method that we wrote before, in terms of join. So to do that, we need to prepare an array of strings, each of which needs to have s inside of it. So let's do that. String array words. let's just call it array. There's a new string array, and I want to have n copies of the original string s, and then I have to fill that array up. I might as well say n here. And I can say that the ith element of the array is simply s. So at this point, array has n, well, each index of our array has a copy of s. And then to return the proper string, I can simply call join with my array, and I'll put nothing in between them, which will cause it to return copies. And so if I run this with the same test code before we saw comp sci and so on, let's see if that works. Okay, so we had a problem, index out of bounds, and it's happening right here in join. And the problem is 0 is not necessarily an element of this array. So this is failing in the case where I want 0 copies of something because this has nothing inside of it. So I have two choices. I can either fix join, so it does the right thing in case the array has nothing inside of it, or I could fix it up here. I'd rather fix join because it's the more general method. So we need a special case when the array is of 0 length. And so if array.length is 0, I want to return the empty string, which gives me 0 copies of the array separated by the joiner. Let's see if this works now. Okay, so here's our copies. The empty string does show up as it should as the first of our copies, and then 1 copy, 2 copy, 3 copies, and so on. We see the same output, but instead of generating them by iteratively appending, we're generating an array and then calling join to do the proper thing with the separator being nothing in between them.